So, what I learned, this is really simple, but I never thought to look up what a galaxy was defined as, which I now know is just a clump of stars, and then we decided to name our clump of stars the Milky Way, which I already knew that. However, I didn't think the definition of galaxy would be that simple. Something that I didn't know was real and have never even heard of before is dark matter, which is crazy since about 71.4% of the rest of the universe is supposedly made up of it. This is a topic that I've never heard be brought up in any class that I've taken thus far. Also, the concept of dark energy, that it acts like a negative gravity, is also new to me. I learned that the pits and craters on Earth and Mars were from minerals that were in water at some point that just sat in one place, and that caused it to make indents. And this is how scientists know that once upon a time there actually was water on Mars, which I had heard that this was a topic of interest like a while ago, but I never decided to do my own research and find out more. So now I definitely know that. I learned that the summer solstice has an exact day, which is June 22nd. I didn't know it was the same time every year. I just knew it was somewhere in the summertime. I also didn't know that the winter solstice happened around December 21st. And these are all things I've heard of but never really knew what they were or where the name came from. I also learned Earth's exact age. I had thought it was about a few billion years old, but I didn't know it was exactly 4.5 to 4.6 billion years old. I also learned a few things from Table 1.2. I noticed that time is broken down a few different ways by eon, era, period, and epoch. I honestly thought era and period were the same things, but now I know that that is not true. I also liked how the table broke down the major life forms and events that happened during each period. It puts time in an easy-to-read timeline, so I highly recommend looking at Table 1.2. I had never thought about the fact that the majority of the land masses on Earth were actually below sea level, and that the majority of the land masses are also in the northern hemisphere, and it's called the land hemisphere, and then the southern hemisphere is mostly water, so it's called the water hemisphere. I also learned that the name for the way we see distance above sea level and is shown by the hypsonographic curve, which I didn't know that that was what it was called, but now I do. And then going with sea level, I learned that 71% of our land is actually below sea level, which I did not know that. Something that I found interesting. I found it interesting that Chapter 1 started out talking about the Big Bang Theory. In the majority of the science classes I've taken, the Big Bang Theory was never mentioned or it was hardly touched on. And for this book to start out with the Big Bang Theory came as a surprise. It's also kind of controversial since most religions believe that their God created Earth and all other things that exist. And Chapter 1 also touches on dark matter and dark energy, which I already talked about earlier, but the thought of some kind of energy or matter that exists that we know little to nothing about is really interesting to me. It makes me curious about it, and I definitely would like to learn more about that later. Something I started thinking about halfway through this chapter is how nobody has ever seen anything, millions and billions of years ago. Yet we think we have such a good idea of what happened and what creatures were alive. And the concept of how much time has passed and how Earth has evolved is hard to comprehend. Since it was 500 million years ago since the very first vertebrate even appeared, to today with humans so advanced that we can travel into space and back. So I think that's really interesting to think about. What I would want to know more about, if you couldn't tell, I'm really interested in space. I would like to know more about the moon and how the moon affects the tide and how the moon's phase affects marine life. I'm also interested in learning about what marine life looked like millions of years ago. I'm also curious about how people back then were able to calculate latitude and longitude and how the system is so good that we today still use it in our GPS. And 3 questions I have. The first one is, how is it possible that dark matter neither blocks nor emits light and still doesn't reflect light? What happens to the light when it hits dark matter? The second question, what is dark energy? Would we ever be able to use it for our own purposes? Question 3, what is the point of calculating residence time?